Hi everyone, today I'm going to be speaking about the method of teaching that I think would work the best for me, and that is the direct method. So the direct method is vocabulary over grammar. So it's a method that is based primarily on speech, where no translation is allowed. So the teacher should not be translating back to the student's native language at all, or the first language. So the student should be really focusing on the target language, the language that they want to learn. For me, I think this is a really good approach because it is difficult learning a language, and it's so easy just to go back to your first language. But if you are in a situation where you cannot do that, it really makes you focus on the language that you are wanting to learn. It can be difficult in some situations if you cannot translate, but then I think it's a really good way to teach. If they don't know a specific word, you can use other words, other methods to try and get the student to think of the answer. So then they're not only thinking of this answer, they're thinking of other vocabulary that they already know or they may have heard somewhere. Sometimes there will be situations when it can be difficult. So I think it's important that with direct speaking, with direct method, you do have to think outside the box. So if you are in maybe a beginner's class where you want to speak a lot, but they really need translation, you can take objects. For example, if you are learning about things in the house, you can take things from the house, small things. Or you can take a bottle of water. You can show them a bottle of water or a bottle of wine. They will know the difference and be able to speak it. They will be able to say it because they've actually seen it. The direct method, I think it allows students to be able to speak in real context. So it's kind of the style of speaking that you do in restaurants and bars with your friends or people who you meet. And because it's speech throughout the whole lesson, I think it gives the students an idea of what it is like to speak in that target language. For example, if you are going to a job interview and you need to speak in the target language, in this example, English, the person who you're interviewing with, they may not know your native language, so you cannot ask them to translate anyway. So the student will need to know what to say in the target language. And I think that's the most important thing, how the students need to understand. If you meet people who you speak the target language with, they may not be able to translate, so you cannot go back into your native language. It already has put them in the position where they are conversational in the target language anyway. I think for me as well, most students' objectives is to learn how to speak in the target language. So, for me personally, I wouldn't go home and tell my parents what grammar I learned in the language I was learning. But I would go home and I would speak to them of what I've learned, and I feel proud because I can actually speak in the language I want to learn. And I think this is important, and the main objectives that people want is to be able to speak when they go traveling, within businesses, people that they meet, or just be conversational. And I think if they're in a position in the classes, in the lessons, where they are speaking conversational in English, they will feel more confident when they leave the lesson and they are meeting people. And even though grammar is really important when learning a language, we have to know the correct forms and structures. For most students, that will come afterwards. Speaking, for me, is the foundations of learning a language. It's important to know how you spell something, how something is grammatically correct. But for me, speaking gives you the confidence, and then the writing and the grammar, the rules can come afterwards. Also, if you know how something sounds, it's usually easier to write. But that comes on to my next point of pronunciation. When learning a language, pronunciation is really important, especially with homophones and different kinds of words that may be difficult for people learning a language. And it's important that we know the words in the correct context. For example, I could have a pair of gloves, or I could have a pear, the fruit. They are spelt differently but sound the same. So it's important for students to understand how they are used in conversations. Another one that can be tricky is knife. It's spelt with a K, but it's pronounced knife. We don't pronounce the K. And for some students, if they are just reading and working on vocabulary, not speaking, they may pronounce this knife, which is incorrect. So it's important that we really try and speak and use as much vocabulary as we can, so then they really get an understanding of it. And I think the direct method, it does link to a second language acquisition. There are many ideas of how we actually acquire a language, but I think it's what registers in your mind first. And some people say it depends on age, depends on how often you speak it, other examples. But for me, I think the first thing would be to speak, to try and put yourself in different situations. Put yourself out of the comfort zone, because that's when you have to really test your level and just keep persevering. So for me, I think second language acquisition, it's typically first speech, reading, writing, and then afterwards grammar. You have to know the rules, but you have to feel comfortable enough speaking and using the vocabulary, sentences, and able to form them correctly. I think in classroom situations, for me, the direct method will work the best because it can also be fun. Like I said earlier, if they don't know a word, you can use other words to try and get them to that word. It can be fun because you can play games, be really interactive, and it's about getting everyone involved. If everybody is involved, they're going to enjoy the lessons a lot more. And I think it's good because then they will also get a strong understanding of what it's like to be able to speak the language. I mean, it's important to learn a language, but it's also important to feel confident enough to actually speak it as well. However, I do think the direct method could be more difficult with beginners because they may not know so much vocabulary and they may not know so many sentences. And if you are speaking all of the time, they may just be thinking, I have no idea what she's talking about. So this is where the direct method may have to cross over into the total physical response. You may have to be more active, be moving, show them visual images, but still try and base it on the direct method where it's speech, speech, speech. And for me, with the future of teaching, I think the direct method is going to be up there with one of the most important methods. Because nowadays, I mean, when I moved to Spain, I spoke English. I spoke English with people in the street or in the supermarkets, and they want to speak English back. They want to practice too. If you go to maybe Italy, if you go to the UK, Germany, you may find yourself speaking English. And most people do want it for traveling, for businesses, for interviews, things like that. And I think most people are going to be wanting to learn based on speech. Like I said earlier, grammar is super important, but it's the confidence level to be able to speak and demonstrate what they know. And with the direct method, it's kind of open. It's a more relaxed style of learning because you are speaking. And I think with a direct method, for me, it would work the most because it's a kind of effortless way to learn a language, to make them feel comfortable, to make it feel natural, to flow, not to feel awkward with so structured. It can flow more because we can involve the students more. So for me, I do think that the direct method would be, for me, the best way of teaching. I think it's the way that I would be able to adapt to my students the best. So yeah, let's see how the direct method works in practice.